We are talking about this child who is so uniquely Otis. Like
He has more personality than most people do.
100%. And I just think that is such
And he doesn't
important...
hide any of it because he can't. And that's the thing I think I love about kids like ours the most.
Welcome to A Place of Yes. I'm your host, Heather Strader, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And all I can say is I dug deep, figured out where I was and where I wanted to be. And for me, the answer was in a place of yes. Welcome to the show. So we are here today. My guest is Perrier. I refer to her often as Otis's mom. We have worked together through Jake's Help from Heaven since about 2014.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about Otis and how you came to find out about Jake's Help from Heaven?
Yeah. So Otis was born in 2011 in August down in New York City. His father and I were in Brooklyn at the time. I think he was about 2 years old when I made a decision to move up to Saratoga, away from the city. It was too hard in a third floor walk up with all of the equipment and everything. But all of his doctor's appointments were still down in New York City, all his specialists and everybody that...
So can you tell the audience, was Otis, you knew right
Otis
away?
So Otis has Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, which is also known as 4P minus. It's a deletion of I believe the short arm on the 4P minus chromosome. The bigger the deletion, the worse the case, if you will. So Otis has a very large deletion, and he's non-mobile, non-verbal. His corpus callosum didn't fuse. He had neck and spine surgery. He's had open heart surgery, eye surgery, cleft palate surgery, all before the age of 6.
Wow.
So it was quite a bit. And to go back on what you were saying about his appointments were all down in New York City, all of his specialists. So being up in Saratoga, not working full time, taking care of him, having that separation from his dad, I really didn't have a tremendous amount of, financial help. We weren't in either of us, his father or I, in a place to be able to really afford me going back and forth. I was at his doctor's, his pediatrician, and I was talking to her about I wasn't really sure. I wasn't comfortable with making the changes to having the doctors appear until we had gone through all of the big stuff.
Yep.
And she recommended Jake's Help from Heaven. And I went online. I think I got in touch with you. I sent an email, but you reached out right away. I kind of don't think I ever really emailed with you after that. It was all text and calling. So
I remember you as one of our early families, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, there's always a special place for me, right? With our early families, with who because we, we were learning together, really,
there's
right?
There's also that bond, I think, too, between moms who have been through it. I mean, and don't get me wrong, dads go through it just as much, but it's different. You had done all the appointments and you had been up on all the nights. So I think for me, it was kind of like a safe space a little bit because everybody always asks, everybody's got a million questions, but you almost sometimes can see that at some point, it's not that they stop listening, but it's kind of like they don't really know what to say and they don't understand the situation other than, I'm so sorry. I don't really always want to hear, I'm so sorry.
So this is such a common theme. And it has honestly been one of the things that has been so great for me, because even though Jake has been gone for 13 years, which is wild.
That's crazy.
Crazy. But even though it's been that long, it's still super fresh. It still sucks. It still hurts. It's all of those things. I can remember the feelings. The mom we spoke to yesterday said the exact same thing. She said, I don't ever want to hear, I'm sorry again. You try, right, to take it with grace because the person's not trying to.
Of course.
But it doesn't make it any easier.
I find now that whenever, especially now because I work at a grocery store, I'm in the checkout line and people, chit-chat or whatever, or a subject will come up that I can relate to, so I'll say something. But I always find that at the end of whatever I mention about Otis is happiest kid you'll ever meet, almost like, please don't say you're sorry. Please don't feel sorry for me.
You're wishing it. You're
Yeah, because it's my experience is just different than other people's experiences. And I was talking with a friend the other day. She kept saying, you have it so hard and you have it so tough. First of all, every mother every parent has it hard and has it tough, and they worry about their kids. I have different worries.
Yep.
I don't have to worry about my kid running and falling down and breaking a bone. I don't have to worry about my kid having his heart broken. I don't have to worry about my kid going out in the world and having disappointment after disappointment. I have
It's different worries.
different worries. They're maybe a little bit more medical, but I just have a different experience. I sometimes think to myself, man, I got it easy. I mean, Otis is very content to sit in his chair and just be around people and listen to music and watch TV and just be included. He doesn't like to be alone, so he's a part of everything. Yeah. That makes it. But it's funny. It's always that, like, you can see it on their face, and I'm like, no, everything's
You're like, don't
great.
say it. Well, and it's also, you touched on something else that has been a theme and that resonates so much with me is it's hard sometimes. There's so much to say, right? And then it's like you can tell sometimes people you can see their eyes gloss over because they're not used to it too.
Yeah.
They don't know. And I love what you said though, because it's different. And I can say, as being Ethan's mom and Jake's mom, the worry's no less. I mean, and sometimes that worry has been more with Ethan for sure.
It's different.
And I will tell you, as a freshman in college, he's off on his own.
Absolutely.
The
sports,
pit in my
driving,
stomach,
all those kinds of
all
things.
those things, in some ways, to your point, are more terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, yes, the medical, the things, it's scary and you're worried.
The
and it's
fevers, if he's going to have a seizure, are we going to wind up being airlifted? Those are my concerns, which is thankfully not everybody else's concerns, because those concerns, they suck.
Yes.
But at the same time,
the day to day is.
Yeah. I mean, my kid is 12 years old, goes to bed at 8:30 at night, and I have to wake him up at 10:30. It's like I have a 17-year-old. I mean, I have the luxury of getting a good night's sleep.
Yep.
He is so madly in love with me and so excited with everything that I do with him. I mean, you can't not feel elated around it.
No.
So he's not mean to me like teenagers can be.
You're missing that phase, which is horrible.
Yeah.
There are so many great parts about this life that we live, right?
For sure.
Like this life. And it's so frustrating and hurtful when people minimize that, right? Like, I feel like, because it's everything you said. You've got a boy who adores you and is not going to go through that stage of like not adore you. It's awesome.
But I mean, moving up to a community with a special needs child, as somebody who was in her 30s at the time, even though I was very familiar with Saratoga because I had lived here for years, it was a different experience coming back with a son with special needs. My friendships changed, my relationships changed. So it was a nice outlet to, no, we weren't going out and having meals together, but it was nice to know that there was somebody there who would get it. And so there were certain, situations where I needed a piece of equipment that I couldn't afford to go get. At least I knew that I had somebody that I could go to who either would lend it to me or
I forgot we used the equipment exchange.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys still have a bunch of stuff that we donated from Otis.
Absolutely.
Which is amazing because you can't really donate a lot of the things that we have. I mean, as standard, some families don't even know what it is.
Let me pop in here and explain to our audience a little bit. So Jake's Help from Heaven is the organization that my husband and I started after our son Jake passed away. So he passed away in 2011, which I just put together is Jake passed away and Otis was born.
Yep.
So we started this foundation to help families like ours, to help families that had a sick kid. And now it's not just sick kids. It's, medically challenged kids who become adults. So, what we love at Jake's Help from Heaven is it's not just about the child. It's about knowing, Otis is going to be 18 and his needs are not going to go away.
Right.
So he will become an adult.
It's a family.
Who still needs help.
It's kind of like a family.
And it is 100% like a family. A lot of times we talk about our Jake's Help from Heaven family. One of our components that we have is called an equipment exchange room. It's this great space where we have equipment that is, it started really with Jake's equipment, right? Mm-hmm. Because to your point, we had this equipment that was outrageously expensive, but there's no place really to pass it on to or to donate it because it's so specific.
Right.
So we started just sort of putting pictures of it out there in case it could help anyone else. And slowly this equipment exchange built into this room where, people could come see what was there, see if it helped, try things out, borrow things, and then donate them back.
Yep.
When we were smaller, I think we did a better job, but it would be nice if we could come back to it. We used to kind of make a point of knowing, so for instance, if there was something that Otis donated and it was going to a specific family, like letting you know, like this is who's using it now.
Right.
When we were smaller, we could kind of manage that a little bit better. But there is something great as a mom. Like I loved when some of Jake's stuff went to someone else.
Oh, I feel the exact same way.
It's helping. It's making a difference. So let's go back to when you moved here, knowing you're making the right move, right, for yourself and for whatever, but also knowing you're leaving the doctors.
Yeah, that was hard.
Because I remember that feeling with Jake. Like we lived here, but all his care was in Boston. And there were some times when I would just lay awake on those bad nights, on those nights when you're worried about like, are we going to get airlifted? Are we, is this cough going to turn into something else? Where I was like, we should just pack it back up and move to Boston.
Yeah.
Like we should just move back.
It was an adjustment. I mean, we were in a small 2-bedroom apartment, a walk-through apartment up on the 3rd floor in Brooklyn. His father and I were not in a great place at the time. And both of us were extremely concerned about Otis. And I needed to be with Otis full time. So he also had the stress of making sure that we were financially okay. And after a while, it just, even taking the subway, I couldn't take the subway to the doctor's appointment, so I'd have to drive. So then I'd have to pay to park. So it just became so expensive just living down there. Yeah. And my mom is in Saratoga, and she has 2 cabins on her property. Both of them are very small, but she has 2 cabins on the property. And she said, if you and Otis, if that separation is helpful, if you and Otis want to stay in the cabin, you're welcome to stay in the cabin. I'll help you with when you need to go down to the city for doctor's appointments. And I would combine those visits down for the doctor's appointments with his father so that his dad would have time with him too. And thankfully, we had our ups and downs, but thankfully we've always maintained a pretty good friendship where we've been able to, be a team for Otis, which is kind of the biggest thing. I mean, I look at I'm on a website with a lot of Wolf Hirschhorn parents, and we have a separate group for moms.
Okay, yep.
And basically it's just a venting session, but it's a safe space for people to be able to talk about their concerns. And with their spouses or their other children or their parents,
just balancing,
just to be able to talk to somebody who maybe would get it a little bit more than somebody else. So I would see all these people talking about how horrible their interaction was, and then the court stuff and everything else. And I've always been really lucky that it worked out that way. And so then also too, he would be able to come up here to see Otis, and he could stay in the cabin. So that really worked out. It was okay for a couple of years, the living in the cabin situation. And
I remember we brought equipment to the cabin.
Yeah, Otis got a little bigger, and the cabin seemed to get a little smaller. And so we moved into a 2-bedroom place. I started working part-time. He started going to school.
Are you still at that same place?
No. Okay. So I'm wound up moving my father up from New York City.
Okay.
And he moved into that 2-bedroom apartment with Otis and I had him live with me for about a year or so. And I had him hired as Otis's caregiver. So he's his respite caregiver. So got my dad all settled and situated. And then after about a year, I got an apartment around the corner, a little bit better setup for Otis, and 2 bathrooms, which is huge. And then my dad is right around the corner. So Otis goes to school in the morning from my house, and then he gets off the bus at my dad's, and my dad gives him calls it, the car wash, gives him his bath and his snack and everything else.
Car wash, I love
and then I pick him up at like 5 o'clock, but it allows me to work. And then if Otis is sick, my dad can stay with him. My dad's 73 years old. I mean, he's killing it with caregiving. I mean, he's doing such a great job.
The 2 things you just talked about, I think, are so important. In all honesty, sometimes are rare, right? Mm-hmm. You and Otis's dad. Like, I like what you said, like just being a team.
Oh, yeah. I don't see how you can't be when you're in that situation. I mean, how many times the 2 of us would be standing in a hospital after he just had a major surgery, not knowing, I mean, I don't care how many differences you have. how can you not lean on each other for that's half of you and half of him? I get why people don't get along, and I get all of that. But for those certain times, you got to
put it aside.
Oh, you really have to.
I think that's so important. And, people have always said, how did you and Brian do it? A, when Jake was around, and B, how did you survive once he passed? Because they say that losing a child, I don't know what the percentages are, but they're very high that couples don't make it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's just such added stress and such added everything. For us, it was always kind of the same. Like, we fought because you care so much sometimes, right? Like, and you see things so differently sometimes. But at the end of the day, when Jake was in the hospital or Jake was having a surgery or any of those things, I can't imagine anyone else because no one else understands.
No, nobody gets it.
And like you said, like, you're the two people that brought him into this world. So you gotta keep that. And
I remember there were a couple of times I was the mom who the nurses would come in, you can't be in the bed with him, Okay,
try and get
me
out.
Me out of the bed.
That was me too. Yeah.
But then it got to the point where it was me in the bed and he was the bouncer at the door. Really, we really advocated for Otis, and I think that's part of why Otis has done so well and has come so far. Because think about it, when even a kid, quote unquote, healthy child, grows up with two parents who are fighting all the time, that can be very damaging.
Absolutely.
And on top of everything else, the last thing that Otis would need would be to have the two of us fighting. So I think just being able to work together, and it doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but you have to be able to put your stuff aside, like you said, and just
I think it's
and just important. Do what's best for him.
And then the second thing you talked about was, the situation with your dad. That's awesome, because so much stresses. We had another mom in that we were talking about, and good family situation, all of the things, but she works 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., right? Because that is the shift and it works for her, for sure, and it works for her family, but it's the shift that allows her to be like present for getting everyone ready for school and doing that. And her husband leaves at 6:15, and it allows her to be home when they come, get off the bus and stuff. Life is hard when you've got a healthy kid, when you've got no kids. Life is expensive lately. Like, prices aren't going to go down. Nothing's going to self-correct. Like, we're just in this world now that is outrageously expensive.
It's hard, especially when you have a special needs kid. And even though I now have a partner in my life, I still consider myself, quote unquote, a single mom sometimes because I'm super controlling and Otis is my business,
Yep. No,
but, I've had the problems where I've had, part-time jobs. And even though my dad is, don't worry about it, I'll take care of him. If he's got a fever, I'm not going to leave that up to my dad to deal with a seizure if it happens.
It's life or death. That's the piece.
Then you lose the job, and then you find another part-time job. So it gets discouraging, but I finally feel like I'm in a groove now. Otis gets on the bus in the morning. I go off to work. He gets off the bus at my dad's. He goes through the car wash. I pick him up. I don't know if you've met my father or not, but the man is insane. So he, in a fun way.
I'm wondering, so 1 year when the Hattie's Mardi Gras was for Jake's, a bunch of you guys came. I'm wondering if your dad was part of that group.
Oh, no, that was my mom and my stepdad, who's also a lot of fun.
I remember your whole group was fun.
My dad, he basically, he screams at Otis, but not like, hey, you dirty rat, what are you doing? And he's always yelling at him and stuff. And it's so funny because Otis absolutely flips out. He loves it. So the two of them are like best friends. They're like pals.
So great.
And it's good for my dad also because my dad kind of started to isolate himself a little bit, and in his older age. It's such an
important purpose. Like, it gives him such a.
That's all he talks about. It's everybody. I go to the grocery store. Oh, you're Terry's daughter? Otis is so handsome. What are you kidding? Everybody, people down at the deli. Oh, I heard Otis was sick last week. I'm like, Dad, he tells everybody everything about him.
That's awesome. I have this very vivid picture of Otis, right? So you talked about how he is such a happy kid. I remember so vividly when we were doing that last filming.
Yes.
And Otis was wearing a hat.
His fedora.
Yeah, his fedora. And he was so awesome. And he was in the special tomato chair, I think, with the
Which
wheel.
We still use.
And he was just so happy and the star of the show, is
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
the star of that video. So it's funny. I was talking to Ethan, and I've been talking to him about the different who we're filming with and what we're doing. So I was like, Otis's mom. And he's like, who's Otis? I was like, the fedora, and he's like, oh, I love Otis.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. At school, he's Frank Sinatra, and we dress him according to that hat. I mean,
It's
really,
so good. It's so good.
He is so cute, and it's funny because tomorrow is picture day at school.
Okay.
So we got the note home, and I'm very particular. And every single school picture, he has worn that fedora since he's 3 years old.
So good.
Still fits him.
It's so good.
12 still fits him. It's great because like the school knows that that's his thing. So I'll just send his clothes in and they'll dress him up for the picture so that he doesn't ruin anything before the picture time.
So I think that speaks such volumes, and it's such an important lesson, I think, for some of our audience as well. We're talking about, so you start off by sharing that Otis is nonverbal, non-mobile, and people assume that means something. Like they assume that means that there's not an individual there, right? And we are talking about this child who is so uniquely Otis. Like
he has more personality than most people do.
100%. And I just think that is such
and he doesn't hide any of it because he can't. And that's the thing I think I love about kids like ours the most. They can't pretend. If something is wrong, something is wrong. And if something shouldn't be funny and they think it's funny, you just have to accept it.
It is what it is.
It really is.
Also, they don't reach that phase, because I think kids, so like Ethan, for instance, like there was a stage where, he was just who he was. And then society forms them a little bit. It takes a while to kind of come back to who you are. Our kids, the Jakes, the Otises, they're not impacted by that. Yeah. They don't hide who they are. It is what it is. And it's just.
They don't care if they're at a restaurant with their mother and they need to have their diaper changed. They don't care. And sometimes, of course, as moms, it's frustrating because of the timing. It's like, oh my God,
you're like, are you kidding me?
Stop screaming. Yeah. Like at the same time, I'm like, you know what? You do you. Like if this is it makes life exciting for you, then absolutely.
And I always like to think that people, like, they mean well, right? That they're coming from a good place. People want to tell you how to raise your kid when they have special needs, or they
everybody
want to judge
has
how
a
you
suggestion.
do it. Yeah, everyone has an opinion, and they have a judgment, and they have a preconceived notion of what it is.
True. But I think that's true in life. I feel like, I know my mother's got an opinion about everything I do, but I think
that is true too.
I think that a lot of times,
I turned 50, my mom still has real thoughts on.
I think in our case, though, I think people tend to share their thoughts on and their suggestions.
Strangers even, though, like it's not
because
like it's just your mom
they think
saying
they're being helpful, and they genuinely want to, give you a bit of reprieve, even though maybe what they're saying doesn't make any sense because they don't know the story. But at the same time, it's like you laugh it off. But I also try to think of it from a good point of view. Like they're just trying to be helpful. You have to live in a world where you got to think that people are coming from a good place.
100%. And that has, I joke about it like now that I'm 50, I'm really, a whole new person. But that really has been, I think, the biggest piece of like self-reflection or growth or whatever for me is just to really, everyone's got their thing, right? And we're like, I'm more sensitive about my thing, right? About kids like Jake, about the families we work with. Like, that is like my thing. So I am more locked in on that.
No, and I think sometimes I look at it from the point of view as at least they're starting a conversation.
Yep.
At least they're asking, because there's so many times where I'll just watch people stare at them.
Yeah.
I would rather talk to a child about Otis than talk to an adult.
Yeah.
Because the child will say, what's wrong with him? Why can't he do this? Why can't he do that?
And
all the things that the parents are thinking, but they don't say. And I get why they don't. It's easier sometimes just to have the conversation with a kid because they, like, again, genuine. They're coming, they don't know any better. I also like being able to kind of give them some knowledge so that maybe they'll be less scared of the next Otis that they see. You know what I mean?
That is 100% where I was going, because I do, it puts more responsibility on us sometimes.
Yeah.
But I do think that's how we change things, right? Or that's how we, not that it's our job to educate everybody, but for sure. Like if you can explain, don't be afraid to ask questions, because then we can answer them, and then for the next time.
It starts with your friends' kids.
Yeah.
And so you're around your friends' children who can fill the role sometimes for some of the things you don't get to have or you miss out on.
Yep.
And being able to, have that with those friends and those children, and then watch those children when their friends come around, because Otis is always included to everybody's birthday parties and all those kinds of things. And I find now that the kids that he grew up with, the ones that he's been around that have come to every one of his birthday parties, come over and said, "Hi, Otis," and then gone off and done their own thing. Now, as he's getting older and they're getting older, "Hey, Otis, how was school this year?" They know he's not going to respond, but they always make sure that they include him. You can't ask for anything better than that. I mean, I really feel like, I have a great network, but I think Otis also has a great network. Which
it's important.
Yeah,
it's
and
important
it's rare.
for him, and it's his happiness too, right? Like it's because as a mom, you just want your kid to be a part of it, right? And even though it's going to be different, like you said, but the fact that now those same kids are having a conversation. Yes, it's a one-sided conversation, but Otis knows. Like Otis hears it, and Otis responds.
They
and
still
smiles.
Pop in and then they pop out, and I'm fine with that. He's a watcher anyway. He likes to just take in what's going on.
And I do think, not that it's our responsibilities or Jake's or Otis's, but people in their presence can't help but become better people.
Usually it starts with what's wrong with him. Then it's, well, can he walk? Will he ever be able to walk? Can he talk? Will he ever be able to talk? Well, what's it called? Is he going to die? All stuff that, of course, an adult's not going to sit down and over a cocktail and be like, "Oh, so how much longer does Otis have?" For me, I came from a place where my son was born and they literally turned around and said to me, "You'll be lucky if he lives to be 3." I want everybody in the world to know as much as they can about him, just because he's so awesome anyway. But when the kids come up, I mean, the looks on their parents' faces like, "Oh my God." And I'm just like, immediately I'm like, it's fine. And I say, these are the questions I want. You're all wondering it too. Like, what, you know what I mean? So just ask.
And those are the questions, right? That's what they were with Jake. Like, what's wrong with him?
Yeah. Why, why are his eyes spread so far apart? Or why is his lip attached to his teeth? Just general questions.
Or they would ask, like, because Jake would kind of, like, especially like when we were trying to, like, figure out right meds or stuff, so he'd be, like, zonked a lot. They were like, why is he sleeping all the time? Like, why, that was a big one. Like, why can't he hold his head up?
Basically any question, and especially the first 6 years, he had operation after operation. I mean, we lived for a couple of months down in Blythedale's Children's Hospital. We went through it. He's got scars, his neck, his open heart surgery, all those kinds of things. So people kids constantly, "Well, what's that from? How did he get that? What? Oh my goodness, did an alligator do that?" Just like silly. But no, and then I tell them, exactly what the story is, and they get quiet and usually bored and go off and do their own thing. But they got the answer that they were looking for one way or the other.
I feel like the questions sometimes they're like validating too, though, right?
Yeah.
You know that everyone's asking them, and especially now, like I love talking about Jake, right? Like you love talking about your kids, like when you got 2 typical kids, you want to talk about them because they're your kids, and it's no different for us.
No, not at all. And especially I think when you have a child who, like, for example, Otis from afar, if you look at him, he looks like he could possibly be a lot younger than he is. When I pull into a handicapped parking spot, because I find it a lot easier to use a stroller because his wheelchair is so heavy, and up until last week, I didn't have a ramp for my car. I would pull the stroller out, and the amount of people who not just look but would actually say something. "I can't believe you'd park here. They have new mother parking or whatever." And I'd actually have to have a conversation in the parking lot about those are the times that I feel like that I have anxiety about his situation, is when I pull in and I'm like, is he sick enough? Does he qualify for certain things, or should I ask for help because there's somebody who's sicker than he is? The parking is like where I'm like, oh, everybody's going to kill me.
You're like, oh, I'm going to be filmed. The show, as you know, is a place of yes. And our tagline really is channeling grief into good. For me, it was this trying to always find the good, because sometimes it was hard,
Yeah.
So for me, it was like I had to find the good, and then I wanted to like be the good. For me, there was like the 2 moments. There was like Jake being sick, and then subsequently when he passed away. But those moments when you realize that your life is going on a different path than you thought it would.
Yeah.
In a way, that's grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in a way, it's like coming to terms with that difference. So did you have that? Do you feel
Yes.
that?
I always wanted 3 kids. I'm one of 3 children. I'm the oldest of 3. think cousins and siblings are so important. And I was a nanny for years. I love kids, always wanted more kids. And I think that for me has been the toughest part, is that I grieve not having that opportunity because I have so much love to give and I desperately I get my hands on somebody else's baby. You're lucky if you're getting it back. I think that for me was the hardest, and wanting so badly for Otis to have a sibling. I think part of me knew that if I did go down that road, one of them could potentially, quote unquote, suffer. Friendships change and relationships change and things like that. And I think a lot of times, even though it's not necessarily on purpose, you don't get invited as much to things because you said no so much in the beginning. And so sometimes I grieve the life that I used to have, if you will.
No, for sure.
And the freedom that I used to have. I mean, I am pretty locked in. As far as a routine goes, there's not a whole lot of spontaneity in my life anymore. Not that there was before, but that was my choice.
Yeah.
And I think now, next weekend, let's fly down to Miami. It's like, okay, that's a long time for me to leave him with my dad. I don't have the money for that. Just things like that.
Variables.
So
yeah.
I would say the two biggest things for me would be the children is number one, because I really always wanted to have lots more kids. I just didn't want to have a situation where I felt like I had a child to help me raise Otis. Do you know what I mean?
No, for sure.
And I so admire you and how you've raised Ethan, because I feel like Ethan never had to live under the cloud of being Jake's brother, but he was under the umbrella of being Jake's brother. Do you know what I mean?
No, I do know
and
what you mean.
It was really special because I think he didn't grow up grieving because of what you did and how you turned as you said, turned your grief into doing something good. That really was a lot to show Ethan as far as how to process your grief, because I'm sure there's days where he thinks about his brother all the time. And then I'm sure there's days where he's got too much going on for him to have that on his mind.
Absolutely. And
I think that a lot of people don't have that to be able to process their grief and know how. I mean, I think that Ethan especially has been very lucky, and I've been very lucky. I mean, my family, unfortunately, we've had a lot of loss in our family, but I was raised that you process it and you go through it and you figure out ways to help you deal with it or remember the person or whatever. You don't bottle it down, and which some people need to do.
Do you have things that you do that, like, when you are feeling particularly like stressed out by, those moments when you're worried? Like, you talked about like the worries that we have that are different, right? Like, is there going to be a massive seizure? Is he going to get airlifted? Like, when you get in that headspace, because I imagine you do sometimes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you just go down the rabbit hole.
You want me to answer this question?
Like, well, I can suspect.
Sorry.
How do you self-care?
Well, I'm not a bubble bath girl, so truthfully, I tend to watch a lot of TV as a way of distraction. I'm just so needled in on him, and if he's not feeling well, he's not out of my eyesight.
Yeah.
And so being with him kind of relaxes me. If I'm not with him, especially if he's sick, I'm stressed out and I'm more concerned, which is, a lot of times, like, he won't have a fever, but I can tell he's getting a cold. And I'm like, well, I should keep him home, because if he gets a fever at school, then he could have a seizure. And then it's like, you can go to work today. And I'm like, no, I can't. I have to stay home with him.
No, but I know that. And that is a hard thing. Like, I would know sometimes with Jake, right? Like, I'd be like, he just has that glassy look in his eye.
It's a sense.
And that glassy look in his eye is going to turn into the sniffles, which is going to turn into an ear infection.
Which could be in an hour from now or tomorrow or next week.
And then that ear infection, like, somehow we end up with pneumonia. Like, it's like, I was like, I don't know how
For
that
us,
happens.
it's RSV.
Yeah, like, you just go down this rabbit hole and then boom.
Yep.
Well, I have so enjoyed catching up with you.
Yeah, this was fun.
This has been such a great opportunity for me to really reconnect with this part of my life that, Jake is so present in everything I do, but it's just been so great to share these moments with people who know and understand my life and I understand theirs. And it just feels so good, right? Because I've got so many great friends and people in my life, but they don't know. You know,
and
they
who doesn't have room for a new friend?
Yes. And they don't. And I just love, I love that we can not have talked for a while.
Yeah.
And then we just connect, and it's as though I talk to you every day.
Absolutely.
So.
And the second I got your email, I didn't quite know what we were doing, but I said yes.
I mean, her response was super quick, and it was like, of course, anything for Jake's. And I was like...
Yeah, because truthfully, I was like, do I get to go in my pajamas? I'm not really sure how these things work. But, I mean, anything. You guys have been such a huge help to us, gosh, over every year. I mean, every year we put in for a grant for something for him. I mean, we are in the process of doing that now. So, and the equipment that we have and knowing that when he outgrows it, I have a place for it to go. It takes a lot of the pressure off. I mean, it's always nice to be able to donate things to the school, but there's so many people doing that already that it's nice to know that, I mean, some of the people that you're helping through Jake's go to school with Otis. I mean, I see you do a delivery and I'm like, I know her. But it's, it's nice when I know that, because like you said, things are so specialized. Nobody understands. I can't just buy a regular car seat. We've been so lucky to have the organization, and it's been really fun for me to watch you be able to do something good with your grief, and also really honestly being able to watch Ethan grow up and be such a big part of it, and seeing just how inspired he is by you and Brian. Like that's, I think, a big part of it.
Well, that's very nice to hear. We always like to, as parents, right? As moms, you always like to hear that kind of thing. So I appreciate that very much. So thank you for being a part of the show. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a thumbs up or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two. For more information and to leave us any feedback, please reach out to us at jakeshelpfromheaven.org.